Finding the right price for your products is one of the hardest decisions you need to make as an Etsy seller. And not doing it right could mean you're missing out on sales and even profits. After spending years in the business world and on Etsy, I've found a pricing strategy that's done absolute wonders for my Etsy shops, helping me compete whilst also making me a healthy profit. So let's talk about some of the most common pricing methods that successful sellers use on Etsy, the special strategy that I would suggest you use, and we'll go through this step by step. And at the end, I'll also be sharing one or two little bonus tips, so make sure to stick around till the end. There are a bunch of different pricing methods out there, and each come with their own pros and cons. Let's start off by talking about some of the most common methods that I see people using on Etsy. Let's start with something called cost-based pricing. The idea here is that you're taking a good look at your costs and then adding a markup or a profit margin to those costs to then ultimately come up with your price. So for example, let's say it costs you $10 to make your product. You could then add a 70% markup to that and sell it for $17. The big benefit by using this method is that you're kind of making sure that you're always going to be in the green and always making a profit. But when it comes to deciding what profit margin to add to your costs, there's sadly not a special rule for you to follow. But what I will say is that what I find is that most brands tend to stick about 50 to 100% markup or profit margin on top of their costs. And one quick note when it comes to using this method and costs in general is that you need to make sure you're accounting for all of your costs, not just your materials. So yeah, you've got production materials, but then you've also got shipping, Etsy ad fees, any other Etsy fees as well. And then there's other so-called fixed costs, such as software costs or any other tools you invest in. Next, we have competitive pricing, which is exactly how it sounds. You see what others around you are charging for similar products and basically price your products in a similar way. So you'd go on Etsy, look at other similar products in your niche that are doing well and see what range they're being sold for. It's a great way to get a good idea of what people may be willing to pay for your product, but I'm personally not a big fan of this method and there's a couple of reasons why. In essence, you're always going to be dependent on what your competitors are doing. I've seen it where a new competitor will enter a niche or a market at a significantly lower price, and the other competitors start scrambling, lowering their prices in order to try to compete. You'll ultimately get yourself into these weird price wars that will, at the end of the day, eat into your profits. Also, I think your goal on Etsy should be to stand out. And by pricing your product exactly like your competitors are doing, you're not doing that. You're basically just joining that pack. And then we've got value-based pricing. Now this is all about setting your prices based on the perceived value of your product to your customer. Not just the costs and not based on what the competition is charging. So if your product offers something really unique and special, let's say it's handmade or it's eco-friendly or you can personalize it, customers might be willing to pay more for that. It's basically tapping into the unique experience or the special benefit that your specific product is providing. For instance, think about a cup of coffee. Now you can get a standard cup at your local coffee shop for about $2, right? But then there's those artisanal coffee shops where a cup goes for $5 or even more. I've seen $10 cups of coffee in some places. But why can they charge that and why do people happily pay more? It's because they value the experience and they have a higher perceived value of that product. So it may be the higher quality beans or the experience of working with the barista or even the ambience of the coffee shop itself. The key here is understanding your own product's value and communicating that. What sets your product apart from everything else out there? Maybe it's your story, maybe it's the specific quality of your item, or maybe it's some other unique features that you have that no other products are offering. And to be able to do this, it's so important that you have a good grasp of who your target audience is. You need to understand what they cherish, what they like, what they dislike, and what they value. The beauty of this approach is that you may be able to raise your prices above your competitors by portraying and expressing this unique value. It's basically you saying my products are worth it and helps attract a customer base that is looking for exactly what you're selling. Now, the reason I wanted to go through those different methods with you is because unfortunately, when it comes to pricing your Etsy creations, there's no one size fits all. What I personally use is a unique hybrid method that combines the best of these three worlds. So understanding your costs, knowing your market, and of course, most importantly, valuing what you offer. So let's go through step by step how you can start using this method today. Now, before we jump into that, if you feel like you're learning something so far, I would love it if you could support me by clicking on the little thumbs up down below. And if you haven't already, I would love to have you along for the ride. I post weekly videos about Etsy and print on demand, so please feel free to subscribe. So before anything else, you need to get a good grip of what your costs actually are. It doesn't matter what you charge for your products. If you're not making a profit, you're not going to be in business for very long. So I would suggest that you open up a spreadsheet or get out a notebook and start jotting down all of your costs. Now, undoubtedly, one of your biggest costs to consider is going to be your material or your production costs. Now, of course, this is going to vary depending on what you're selling, how you're producing your product, if you're making them yourself versus if you're using a different provider. But you need to get a good grasp of what those costs actually are. So if you're a handmade Etsy seller, it's probably pretty likely that you're sourcing your materials from different providers and different companies. Obviously, the idea for you would be to go away and get an idea of what your costs actually are from them. I know a lot of you are also in the print on demand space. So using a provider such as Printify, as you can see right here, there's actually really easy ways to actually get a grasp of what your costs would be, your production and shipping costs. So example, let's look at this tea towel here. If you scroll down, select the provider you're going to use, and then on provider information, this then opens up a tab with all of the pricing or cost information. So we can see here, there's only one variant available. That's $8.58. Printify also offers a premium subscription service, which essentially gives you access to discounted rates. So you can see here, $8.58 is the normal price, $6.61 if you have Printify Premium. If you want to give Printify Premium a try, there's a link in my description below. It gives you 30 days free access to basically test it out. But let's go with this price for now. So let's say $8.58. If you then click on the shipping tab, because we don't want to forget about that, it then gives you all of the general shipping information. So let's say we're shipping to the US. One item would be $5.49. So you can do this for any providers on Printify. Printful offers similar information as well. It's definitely important for you to go and analyze these to get a good understanding of what your costs actually are. Now, something else for my international friends out there to consider and not forget about is VAT. So if you are using a provider such as Printify, but this also goes for if you're making handmade products, you will typically be expected to pay VAT on anything that you're purchasing. So the prices that you see here from Printify, if you're selling to someone, for example, in the UK, from the UK, you will typically be expected to pay 20% VAT on top of those costs. Again, this is applicable if you're based in a VAT country, such as the UK, and selling to someone else in a VAT country. And keep in mind that I've not really looked at fixed costs yet. Now, as the name suggests, fixed costs are basically costs that will stay the same regardless of how much of a product you sell. So it could be things like, an Everbee subscription. Maybe you subscribe to Canva or Kittle or ChatGPT even, or eRank. It can actually be quite tricky to take these into account when you're looking at pricing your products, because there isn't like a set cost for each product that you're selling. But you definitely should still keep these in mind, so understanding what your fixed costs are on a monthly basis. So once we've got an idea about our costs, we need to start to make sure that we know who we're selling to. We need to know our target audience. This is all about diving deep into understanding what our target market really wants, what they really value, and of course, what they can actually afford. Let's take, for example, t-shirts that are designed and targeted specifically for college students. Their budget to buy stuff is most likely going to be a little bit tighter than, let's say, a middle-aged professional looking to buy some home decor. At the end of the day, their interests, their needs, and of course their financial capacity is really going to shape, how you actually price and market your products. Now, you might be tempted to cast a wide net and say, I'm targeting everyone. But trying to appeal to everyone often leads to actually appealing to no one. Your message could get diluted, your branding just becomes vague, and your product may just become lost in kind of like a sea of generalities. So make sure to find your target audience and hone in on them. And I know earlier I spoke quite negatively about competitive pricing, but at the end of the day, we still do need to understand what the competitive landscape actually looks like. So our next step is to analyze our competition. So to do a little bit of competitor research, we're going to jump into Etsy and we're going to stick with our tea towel example. And let's say specifically that I am targeting, hobby bakers or chefs that maybe, like a bit of humor. They like something funny in their lives. So I maybe want to have a look at creating funny tea towels. So I'm going to look specifically for that. So let's do a pretty general search here. Funny tea towel. Let's see what comes up. So lots of different options turn up here. The idea here is that you're going to go through and get a general idea of a price range across these different competitor products. So getting an understanding of what people are willing to pay at the moment on Etsy for products that may be of a similar nature. Another thing to keep in mind is that you do, as much as possible, want to try and analyze those listings that are doing well. So you can usually see that without any tools by looking up here at the bestseller badges. A lot of the times there's also a Etsy's pick badge. Sometimes you see a popular now badge. I would try to focus on those to get a bit of an idea. So let's actually look into some of these listings. I've actually picked out 3 already that I thought were quite a good example, quite a good representation. So this is one example I found. As you can see right at the top here, 20 plus views in the last 24 hours. It's usually a good sign. Doesn't mean there's definitely sales, but it means there's a bit of traction there. And we can see it's $11.95. I'll double check that by clicking on the drop down here. We can see, yep, if you buy an individual one, it's about $12. But do remember that this may not include shipping. So if you scroll a little bit further down, you'll then see shipping information. And as you can see here, delivery cost is an additional $4. So overall, you're going to be paying about $16 for one of these. Okay, we've noted that. Let's go to another one. I'm sorry about the language, but I just really like this tea towel. But we've got about $11 for this one. And if you scroll down again, it's another $4, right? Okay, so we've got $15. So we've got $16, $15. Look at one other one. I thought this one was very interesting because it's a little more expensive. We've got $16.50. You also have the option to add a personalization for an additional $4, right? Keep that in mind for later. And then if you scroll down, we've got a $9 delivery cost, right? So overall, what are we going to be looking at here? If you go for a normal one here, you're looking at about $25, $26 for a tea towel. And you can see it's in 7 baskets, which is usually a good sign, right? People are quite interested in this product. So what I would suggest you do is basically do what I did there in a minute and a half and take your time to actually go through and analyze a subset of competitors. So maybe choose 10 or 15 competitors and do an analysis of what price points they're selling their products at, and then find a range. So now we actually have a little bit of a price range of what some of our competitors are charging out there on Etsy. We can actually now take that information and the information before on what our costs are and start having a look at what we could actually start charging. So just to get a little bit of an idea, we've got a handy little tool here. This is in eRank. If you're interested in exploring eRank, I again have a link in the description to eRank down below. But within eRank, there's actually a little profit calculator, which is really, really helpful. You can find profit calculators all over the internet. I really like this one because you can switch the location and it will automatically adjust the currency and the specific Etsy fees that you'll get charged depending on your region as well. So I really like that with this eRank calculator. But we just want to get a little bit of a gist here as to what our profit margins could potentially be based on our costs and what our competitors are doing out there. So let's plug in our costs first. So if we go down here back to our Printify, remember we had $8.58 is our material cost. And then we had shipping of, I think it was $5.49. Put that in. Okay, those are our costs so far. We'll leave labor cost empty for now. Etsy ads and renewing fees, we'll leave that for now as well. And then price up here is somewhere where we can now start experimenting with, right? So let's think about our competitors, right? We had that price range. Let's say that I'm going to charge $13 and a shipping price of $4. That seemed to be kind of the norm amongst our competitors. If I now click on calculate, we can see, oh, okay, estimated profit down here, 87 cents. That's not very much, is it? Now there's a couple of things to consider here, right? First things first, we discussed this a little bit earlier. This is where Printify Premium can really help. So if you're kind of achieving quantities of sales at which Printify Premium may be worth it, you could actually look at getting these costs down somewhat. So if we go back and have a look at our Printify Premium price, $6.61. So let's update that price in here. We'll click update. We can see now our profit margin's gone up to $2.84. Still not a massive margin, but you can see it is substantially different to the margin we had previously without Printify Premium. But it's not a big profit margin, right? So there's one additional final step that I really want you to look at. And this is after you've looked at the costs, after you've understood your target audience, and of course, assessed your competitors. And that is to do a little bit of a self-reflection and evaluate what your value proposition is. What is something so unique and so special that sets your product apart from these competitors? What's something that your customers might be willing to pay a little bit more for? So to start with, we could actually have a look back at our competitors to see what is it that they're maybe trying to stand out with? What is something that makes them unique? But then we need to go even a step further and think about, okay, but what makes my product even better than theirs? And are customers going to be willing to pay a little bit more to get that additional value? So you could, for example, focus on quality a bit more, right? So instead of just selling a pretty standard Gildan t-shirt, maybe have a look at the more premium shirts. Have a look at providing and marketing your products as that premium quality brand. Personalization is another massive one. You know, I was looking through these competitors and didn't really see that many options to personalize these tea towels. Maybe that's something you could have a look at offering. People may be willing to pay a higher premium in order to have that customization aspect. And something else that is absolutely going to help your product's perceived value is your brand. If you have a strong brand that portrays trust and builds a connection with your target customer, it can be an absolute game changer. Let's look at a normal polo shirt, for example. Now you could probably go and buy one of these right now for like $5, but then you've got brands like Lacoste or Polo charging, $100 plus for one. And why? Because of their brand and the perceived value that their customers have of them. People just connect with their brand. They understand their values and they have trust that the quality of the item they're going to get is of high quality. So have a think about whether you might actually be in a position to raise your prices above what your competitors are charging. But only if you believe your products are providing that unique value. If you charge high prices and then send out some rubbish quality product that doesn't meet their expectations, it could quite quickly lead to bad reviews on Etsy, and we don't want that. So to wrap things up, here are 2 bonus tips that I want you to keep in mind around all of this pricing stuff. As you can see, there's loads of different ways to price your products and there's no right or wrong way. I'm not going to sit here and tell you you need to start selling your mugs at $15 because that would be a lie. I know nothing about your costs, your target customer, your competition, or the extra value that you're providing. Only you can answer that. But the good news is, and this is tip number 1, is that it's okay to experiment with your prices. In fact, I actually encourage it. Don't be scared to test out different price points for a certain period of time and see how customers react to it. And then use customer feedback as a tool to adjust your prices. So for example, if customers really like your products, but there are some comments in the feedback around your high prices, maybe it's something you need to evaluate and reassess. Also, the market changes all the time, right? Trends change, new competitors emerge. Your costs may increase or decrease. What works today might not work tomorrow in terms of pricing, so you need to stay on top of the ball around that. And little tip number 2 is that it's okay to lose customers. It might sound a bit weird, but not every customer has to be your customer, and that's okay. For example, if you raise your prices above the prices that your competitors are charging, you might lose some of those customers that might be looking for the cheapest prices. But you're building a community around a customer group that truly values that specific thing that you're offering at that price point. And that can be quite powerful for you longer term. Now, we spoke quite a lot about costs in this video, but if you're not quite sure what costs you actually have while working on Etsy, then you should go and check this video out next, where we'll talk about costs in a lot more detail. I'll see you in the next video.